Welcome to today's Explainer. Think of this session as your masterclass study guide to get you completely up to speed on the world's absolute most important new tech policy. The United Nations General Assembly has just established its first ever institutionalized technical backbone for artificial intelligence. We're talking about the brand new independent international scientific panel on AI. So if you want to understand exactly how the globe plans to handle the AI revolution, you are in the exact right place. Let's kick things off with a massive question for your notes. How in the world do we actually control an artificial intelligence that we don't even fully understand yet? The rapid, cross-border spread of generative AI brings incredible benefits, for sure, but also some really acute systemic vulnerabilities. So, how do you put guardrails on something moving at light speed? Well, that is exactly the puzzle this UN panel was built to solve. Okay, let's dive right into the syllabus. Today, we're going to cover the governance gap, the panel's structure and mandate, a really brilliant climate analogy, the Global South strategy, core challenges, and then we'll wrap up with a practice exam.
Moving into Section 1, the governance gap. Let's look at why this global panel was urgently needed in the very first place.
Right now, tech rules are literally a wild west of fragmentation. It's a totally chaotic landscape where every major hub has a completely different approach to AI laws. You have the European Union using a risk-stratified, legally binding AI Act. Then you've got the United States leaning on executive orders and voluntary corporate commitments. Meanwhile, China has a very targeted, state-centric system. This disjointed map makes it a total nightmare to deploy software across borders, and it creates massive jurisdictional loopholes.
And that beautifully illustrates a major term you absolutely need to know: digital colonialism. This happens when a tiny cluster of advanced nations and massive multinational corporations essentially hoard the frontier computing power. We're talking advanced GPUs, hyperscale data centers, curated training datasets, the whole shebang. Without open standards, resource-constrained nations are just left behind, forced to become passive, dependent consumers of technology that's trained entirely on foreign data and foreign values.
So, definitely highlight these points in your notes for Section 1, fragmented global tech laws, the very real threat of digital colonialism, and the battle between data sovereignty and compute monopolies. These three global governance deficits are exactly why the UN General Assembly stepped in. When nations try to enforce strict data localization laws without having their own native computing infrastructure, they actually stifle their own local innovation, leaving them entirely reliant on external tech giants. It is a really critical trap.
All right, Section 2, Structure and Mandate. Let's break down the institutional anatomy of this solution, which was established back in August 2025.
The absolute crucial takeaway here is this number, exactly 40. 40 independent, globally recognized scientists were chosen from a massive pool of over 2,600 applicants to form this panel. And leadership really matters here. They're co-chaired by Turing Award winner Yoshua Bengio and Nobel laureate Maria Ressa.
When you look at the institutional framework, there is a very clear chain of command. Authority flows directly down from the UN General Assembly to the Secretary General's nominations. But crucially, notice where the flow goes next. These 40 experts do not write laws. They pass their scientific reports and early warnings directly to the Universal Global Dialogue on AI governance. That is where the actual intergovernmental policymaking happens.
Step by step, their mandate is essentially designed to be an analytical evidence engine. First, they map the shifting boundaries of deep learning. Second, they fix information gaps for developing nations that lack domestic institutions to evaluate these massive AI systems. Third, they look out for early warnings, quantifying threats like automated disinformation, algorithmic bias, or even AI-assisted chemical synthesis. And finally, they bridge that science into policy, guiding member states without actually dictating the laws.
Here's your quick recap cheat sheet for Section 2. Just remember, this panel is entirely non-political and strictly independent. Members serve a fixed 3-year term starting in February 2026, and they serve in their personal capacities. They do not represent their home governments or their corporations. Plus, it's highly interdisciplinary, merging hardcore computer science with experts in human rights, public health, and childhood development.
Moving right along to Section 3, the climate analogy. Let's see how this builds upon an environmental strategy you might already be familiar with.
If you only remember one single thing for the test, make it this comparison. The UN AI panel is explicitly modeled structurally and functionally after the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. just like the IPCC builds a data-driven consensus on climate science to guide treaties like the Paris Agreement. The AI panel evaluates computing capabilities to build a global consensus that will inform the UN global dialogue.
Jot these down. The analogy works perfectly because both panels separate hard technical data from messy political negotiations. The AI panel aims to replace hype and fear with objective empirical evidence. It acts purely as an advisory engine, exactly like climate scientists do for environmental policy.
Okay, Section 4, Global South Strategy. Let's shift gears and look at how the developing world is making sure they have a powerful voice in this new framework. The inclusion of figures like Professor B. Ravindran, the head of the Wadhwani School of Data Science and AI at IIT Madras, signals a massive shift. As the sole Indian expert on the panel, his presence proves that developing nations want to be critical technical standard setters, not just massive consumer markets. India's vision of inclusive digital public infrastructure is now a core component of global AI assessments. Their strategy here is fascinating. Nations like India are advocating heavily for the global south, really prioritizing real-world issues like agricultural optimization and accessible healthcare over abstract existential risk debates. They're championing a trusted AI commons, which is a global repository for verified open-source models. Most importantly, they are actively pushing back against advanced tech hubs who try to use non-proliferation rhetoric to lock down AI development under the guise of safety, which could completely freeze out developing nations.
So, for your Section 4 recap, the Global South's main objective is practical inclusion and preventing tech monopolies from freezing them out. By aligning global positioning with massive internal technology roadmaps, like the multi-billion rupee India AI mission, developing economies are aggressively securing equitable access to advanced software for their citizens.
All right, Section 5, Core Challenges. Because let's face it, no global institution is perfect, so let's examine the real-world roadblocks this panel is going to face over their 3-year term.
There are 4 critical vulnerabilities we need to talk about. First, the enforcement gap. The panel has absolutely no binding legal authority. It's purely advisory. Second, corporate information asymmetry. Tech companies develop proprietary frontier models behind closed doors, making it incredibly hard for independent scientists to get the deep technical access they need to evaluate them without violating IP laws. Third, geopolitical friction. Trying to get consensus on concepts like safety and misinformation is incredibly tough among panel members from nations with vastly different views on state surveillance and civil liberties. And finally, the rapid pace of innovation.
Definitely lock these limitations into your notes. The contrast between the speed of deep learning and the speed of multilateral reporting is a huge hurdle. Deep learning models evolve in a matter of weeks, while traditional UN reports take months or even years to compile and publish. There's a constant looming risk that by the time the panel formalizes its scientific findings, the technology will have already completely leapfrogged them.
Finally, Section 6, Practice Exam. It's time to apply everything we've just covered in this explainer to some actual analytical practice questions. Let's see how well you can synthesize this info.
Based on our review, how would you evaluate the panel's ability to actually stop digital colonialism using the IPCC model we discussed? You definitely want to bring up the panel's non-prescriptive mandate and how their lack of enforcement power clashes with the reality of differing AI rules in the EU, the US, and China. And I want to leave you with this thought to ponder for your final prep. In an era completely dominated by corporate tech giants hoarding compute power, can an advisory, independent scientific panel truly safeguard the world's equitable future? Or is the technology simply moving far too fast for any multilateral institution to govern? Think about the Global South's push for open-source AI as you formulate your answer. Thank you so much for joining this session, and happy studying.